It's time for the Dynamics podcast, and today we've got someone on. It's a whole team of Microsoft employees responsible for a product that is going to be at the heart of Dynamics 365. It's going to be the core of how you do integrations between different applications in Dynamics 365. It's going to be at the core on how you develop future applications, and even how Microsoft is developing their future Dynamics 365 applications. It's going to be a new way of doing EDI, new way of doing integrations with third-party systems or business applications that you have running on-prem. I'm, of course, talking about the Common Data Service. We've got the team. Stay tuned.
This is the Dynamics Podcast, Episode 17, recorded August 16th, 2017. Common Data Service, with Sabin, Nair, Matthew Maertens, and Lance Delano.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dynamics Podcast. My name is Fredrik Sætre, and joining me today is my lovely colleague, Tommy Skaue. Hello, Tommy.
Hi, Fredrik. How are you?
I'm super. Did you have a great summer vacation?
Yeah, I did. I was traveling to Portugal. Never been there before. My first time. I enjoy the country. I want to come back there someday. Let's just leave it at that and get on topic.
Yeah, let's do that. Because it's been a while since we've done a podcast. Now it's been like 2 months almost.
Yep.
And last time we had Dave Frostley on together with Martin Drapp, and awesome podcast. But we kind of tried to book a team for Microsoft for a long time now. Big stuff is happening. A lot of different things with Dynamics and also other products within Microsoft SKU and the platform. So I think it was in April or May we had the Business Forward event where Satya Nadella came out. He talked about everything that had to do with business systems, and they were moving away from monolithic systems into more composite apps. And he actually said that they're moving away from siloed data to a common data model and composite apps. And that kind of struck me that, this common data service thing is really going to be a big thing. So we got them on. Hello to the team from Microsoft. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Should we want to, maybe we should do an introduction to you guys. Maybe you can start off, Sabin. Who are you and what you do and how'd you get there?
My name is Sabin Nair. I'm a program manager on the Common Data Service team. I've had a few stints in other parts of Microsoft. I've been here. This is my only job, so I've been here for a while. A great place to work, and we are enjoying with this new service, relatively new service. It's been, I believe, 8 to 9 months. A lot of appeal based on the customers that we have spoken to at various conferences at Inspire, and we are also going to Ignite. So if you guys are there, we definitely would love to meet you. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Matthew.
Hey guys, I'm Matthew Maertens. I'm a program manager on the Common Data Service, and I cover all things security. There may be a chance a few listeners in the podcast have ran into me before. I came out of AX and Dynamics 365 for financials and operations, as we call it now, working on security there as well as metadata and customizations before that. And I'll give it over to Lance.
Hi, I'm Lance Delano, and I work on data integration, and that's closely associated with the Common Data Service. In fact, as part of the Common Data Service group. Been around the industry for a long time, actually. Been in SQL Server, I was in Visual Studio, I was at a couple of startups before that, worked at a company called Visio, Asymmetrics, Infomodelers. So a strong background in data modeling and developer tools. Started in the Dynamics team about almost a year ago, coming over from Power BI, where I had worked for about 3 years.
Cool.
All right. Back to you, Fredrik.
Yeah. So you guys want to show us stuff. There's started to roll out, because I wanted to be early on this. This has been kind of, I saw this early. I wanted to book you guys. You've been like super busy with build even back in the day. That was one of the reasons why we had to postpone. So we've been talking about this for a while. So the Common Data Service, could you just describe what it is?
Sure. I mean, I have slides to speak to this, but I'll just give you an overview. The best way to explain, I think it's more important to understand why. Why did we even build this service?
Yeah.
So we are trying to solve a specific problem, and I think everybody we've spoken to can relate to that. The problem of data spread out everywhere in a company. So you have these islands of data across the company. And when you build applications, everybody wants to take this data and like build applications on top of it. The applications can never give you this end-to-end view because the data under it is kind of isolated. So we are doing that work of pulling data together into one place. And that's what Common Data Service helps you do. And the whole commoditizing the movement of data is something that we do so that we kind of do the heavy lifting and you can focus on building applications. So that kind of explains the why and what, to some extent, we are a cloud service sitting on Azure SQL, if that fancies you. But this is kind of in a nutshell. This is what Common Data Service is. We make pulling data into one place so that you can just focus on building applications. That's pretty much our mantra, so to speak. So you've heard companies around the world, especially Microsoft, talk about digital transformation. We are in this world where everybody wants to be data-driven. So what is at the heart of digital transformation is information, and in our world, we call it data. So in this data-driven world, every business wants to take an action based on data. Now, this action is most valuable when it's based on complete, consistent, and correct end-to-end views. I think everybody can relate to that. You want something not based on like isolated data, basically. You want that end-to-end kind of view. But the problem that everybody we've spoken to, customers and partners, they say, hey, data is everywhere. And I'm sure you can relate to this. To kind of give you a simple illustration, think of a bunch of applications in your HR department meant for those specific purposes, another set of applications in the finance department. And these are like applications sitting on data sources. So all these applications are driven by the data sources under them. So think of a bunch of we're from Microsoft, so I should say SQL Service, but I'm sure there are other popular databases as well. So these are pumping data through for all these applications. Similarly, you have a travel department, same story there. You have your own little application. Maybe you're reporting out some of the insights from these various systems or applications. Well, it's definitely a lot of hard work and effort and dollars, basically, bottom line, to kind of even maintain the data sources and the applications behind running in each section. So HR has to spend some dollars, finance does, travel does. So there is definitely a cost involved and an effort involved. Now, if you want to make these apps talk to each other, by the way, all of this can be done. It's being done today. So it's not something I'm telling you something extraordinarily different. This can be done. But the bottom line is it's cumbersome. There's a lot of effort required, costs you a lot of money. So when you want applications to start talking to each other, so say the travel app wants to pick up some information, say from the finance and HR, you can make that happen by kind of making these things talk to each other, by connecting these data sources to each other. And similarly, your own app, you can report insights from each of these areas by connecting to the corresponding data sources. But again, it's easy to, it kind of illustrates that this is not trivial work. There is effort and cost involved. So that's where, and of course, needless to say, you always have to deal with this. Am I looking at the right data? Is this latest data? Is it stale data? Is it incomplete data? Worse, is that secure? So these are common questions that everybody's asking. They're living with this problem. They want to solve it. And that's what we try to do with Common Data Service, wherein we do the heavy lifting. CDS, or Common Data Service, and you will often hear us refer to as CDS because it's a pretty cool acronym. So CDS is where the Dynamics 365, Office 365, and Azure Active Directory data come together. And as we go forward, I'll explain what that means. So just again, like as I said earlier, we do the heavy lifting, and we'll talk about some specific pillars where we talk about the heavy lifting and how things work. But this kind of gives you a little picture of how we thought that we could be at the middle, wherein all their data is sitting, and every other application is talking to that common data. Automatically makes for a very powerful, compelling service. Okay, so what is the Common Data Service? And I'll just build up the slide for you. So as I said, we want to be the focal point for your data. And as I said, we'll get there. There are multiple ways to do it. You can go bring your own data and dump it into put it into CDS. That's one way, but that's not cool. The cool factor is wherein we kind of do the heavy lifting for you. We commoditize the movement of data. And every time I say this, I kind of move my hands from the left to right. So left is usually the data sources, and coming on the right is where we sit. So we move the data for you. And I'll show you an example of a feature that we recently released and what's coming in the future as well. So that's how we try to be the focal point for your data. It's a great place to build and manage apps, and it just works with the rest of Microsoft. Here, this is to showcase that if you guys have been in the business application group, if you have dealt with the business application group at Microsoft, you may have often heard of Power Apps, Power BI, and Flow. So Power Apps is typically when you want to build an application to take some action, you would use Power Apps, and it's a very low code, no code kind of way of building applications for citizen developers, so to speak. Power BI, a very popular service, is to provide you insights from these various applications from the data that you have. And finally, Flow is to automate your business processes. So these different apps and services just seamlessly work with the Common Data Service, and that's the promise we make. So today you can do some of this on your own, but you'll have to do some extra work to make Power App work with your application, to make Flow work with your application data. But for us, it just seamlessly works. So that's kind of like the pillars of what is CDS, and the next sections, or next 2 or 3 sections, will be about deep diving into each of these pillars. So the focal point for data. Now I'll just kind of build this up so that kind of get the story. So on the left-hand side, say at the very center, you have your application. Now, say you have a problem wherein you want to make your application work with other applications and services. As I said earlier, you can absolutely make that happen. Maybe the other application has exposes some API that you can kind of write some custom code. Very much doable, but you have to do some extra effort. That's the key point here. So you can make these apps talk to each other. Now, if you want to pull data from Dynamics, the Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, and the Dynamics 365 for Sales, are ERP or CRM systems here. Similarly, if you want to get information from Azure Active Directory and also Office 365, it is all doable. But in each case, you are going to do some custom work. Now, on the right-hand side, as I explained earlier, this is how we are trying to solve the problem. We pull all the data because we know how to work with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, Sales, Azure Active Directory, Office 365. We kind of get that together, and other applications which are already built on Power Apps, on Power BI, we kind of seamlessly work with them. So putting the data at the center makes these applications smarter as well, and including your own app, you can make you're talking to the same set of data. So the data in this case as I mentioned earlier, you are always talking to one set of data, so it is correct and consistent and concise. So that's kind of the high level of focal point for data. Building and managing apps, as I mentioned earlier, and I showed this in a block level diagram as well. For a citizen developer, what we also refer to as a low code, no code kind of application, where you don't have to typically write a lot of code. You can absolutely do that using Power Apps. It's a very, very powerful way of building applications. In fact, I guarantee that in under 30 minutes, you can build a pretty decent app. Give it a day or two, you can build a very compelling application on Power Apps. It is as simple, and we make it that simple for you. So on one hand, on the one end of the spectrum, you have Power Apps for the low-code, no-code citizen developers. On the other hand, we also have an SDK if you want to build those multi-tenant complex applications. We won't be talking much about the SDK today. There are other pieces we'll focus on. And of course, this is Matthew's favorite area, which is none of this is worthy if you don't have a security substrate. And the cool thing is, and I'll show you in the diagram as well, that the good thing about is we have a security layer. You set up permissions and once, and all the applications, the promise that we make is all the applications that are built on CDS will honor that. So you don't have to toggle it separately for each application. I mean, you're welcome to do so, but you don't have to. So that's the build and manage apps kind of space. And I'm kind of flying through this, and I'll show you some demos so that it makes more sense eventually. And I think I've covered this enough. Like, it just works. The Power BI Flow, Power Apps. I'll also show like how you could. We have some pretty nifty add-ins. You can play with this data. There's an Excel add-in that you can use to kind of manipulate data in the Common Data Service, and I'll demo that for you. All right. So finally, why the Common Data Service? So as I said, the apps are smarter. It increases the impact of your applications because you're integrating data from Azure AD, Office, and Dynamics. Consistency. Clearly, if you have a single data model that can be shared across other apps and services, you are clearly being consistent. Extensible. I'll show this in a demo how the CDM, a lot of people call it sometimes CDM, they interchangeably call it CDM and CDS. Always remember the service itself is CDS or Common Data Service. CDM is the heart of the service, which is the data modeling piece, the Common Data Model, so which is very extensible. And the economy. Since we are doing the heavy lifting for you, we are making things easier for you, lower dollars for you. All right. So the block level diagram, a very popular one. I'm just going to build this up. Okay. Oh, I built up too much. So at the let's start from the bottom up, and we'll go left and up and then right. So at the very heart, I said, if you remember, a common data model. So what does the common data model have? Now, when you're working with CDS, you're typically working with entities. Entities are chunks of shared data. A lot of times people, customers and partners, they ask us, hey, so this is sitting on Azure SQL, so I should be able to just directly work with SQL. Well, we abstract that the underlying service from you so that it's easier to work with what we call entities. So we have out of the box, and I counted this a couple of weeks back, we have 105 entities, I believe, which these are standard entities because we ship it out of the box, so to speak. When we call it standard entities, not just because we ship it, these are built on industry standards. So you have account entities to deal with all the information that you typically have with account. These entities are kind of grouped in forms of like, there's a case entity for customer service kind of groups, similarly with account and sales orders. So I'll show you that in a few minutes as well. So you have what we call standard entities. If these entities don't quite serve your purpose, I said earlier, you're most welcome to come and extend entities by creating additional fields, even in the standard entities. But if, say, some of these don't quite fit the needs, you can create custom entities as well. So you have the flexibility to do that. And we also have some of our first-party applications. If you've kept up with the news, a month back, I believe, we announced, I think it was Satya who announced that Talent, a new first-party application which was built on CDS, was announced. I think it was a show in New York City. So Talent applications can actually, or typically built on the SDK, can instantiate entities in CDS. So that's where the ISV and standard entities come into picture. Along with that, now on the left-hand side, also actually let me go to the top first. So security model, this is what I say, like we'll have Matthew talk more about this, and this is what I mean by it. There's a security layer. You set up the permissions once, and all the applications will honor the permissions set on the security model. On the left-hand side, this is by far the hottest feature, the data integrator. I mentioned this earlier. The Dynamics 365 suite of products basically split between the AX and CRM world, or Dynamics 365 for finance and operations and Dynamics 365 for sales. These inherently don't talk to each other. One way of solving that, and we are thinking about it as scenarios, and a lot of people must have heard of this prospect to cash. Think of a prospect that comes into your company, of somebody who wants to buy certain things, which eventually becomes a sales order becomes an invoice, and then finally you get paid for it. That whole process is captured in what we call a prospect to cash scenario, and we pull the master data into CDS, and that's how we are solving the problem of these a suite of products not talking to each other today. So that's what the data integration platform does. And that's not the only thing. This is just one of the scenarios that is lit up by the data integration. There are several other scenarios. If you go on the right-hand side, you would see there is work, and this is not out yet. There's work being done wherein we are working with the Microsoft Graph team to pull Azure Active Directory and Office 365 information into CDS. I won't go into details of like, are we pulling the whole thing? Well, clearly not. There are different nifty ways of doing it. But imagine the power of having Office 365 data so that you can build applications. Now you can directly have applications with, say, you can leverage the calendars of people. You can send invites using the Office 365 calendars. So it makes for a very compelling case, because now you don't have to worry about moving the data. We do it for you. And so you just focus on building apps. Again, taking you to the left-hand side, and you must have seen a recent YouTube video on this. And this is, again, a super duper hot feature. Again, this is not just me talking. It's what we've heard from customers and partners as well. So we have a way to pull data from external systems. I think Lance may touch upon this topic maybe as we go forward, but it's typically called Power Query.
Yeah, so it depends on how much time we have, but I might be able to do a little demo of that as well. And Power Query is the name of the feature as it shows up in both Excel and in Power BI.
Great. And Lance will talk more about this. Power Query existed before as well. We're just leveraging that power, so to speak. You'll hear that. We love the word power. You'll soon see in a slide as well. So we have, this is a hot feature. Look up the YouTube video. Lance, if he gets a chance to talk about it, he'll talk about it as well. This is a way we're going to pull data from external systems.
Yeah, we're going to put a link to it in the description below. So if you want to check that out, it's one of the videos that we have a link to.
Great.
Yeah. Super.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So now building on the top, and I've covered some of this before as well. Think of it as two sides of the spectrum. On the left-hand side, you have what we call Power Apps for citizen developers. On the right-hand side, we have first-party apps and built via SDK. The reason we explicitly even show the first-party apps block there, this is just to say that the SDK that we ship is the same SDK that is used to build our first-party applications. So we are not doing something different behind the scenes using some private APIs that we're not exposing. It's the same SDK that you will get your hands on. Right now, it's in preview, but it should be released pretty soon. You should hear some announcements. And we are constantly changing. One thing I forgot to mention, that is kind of a pretty cool thing about any cloud service, especially in our group, wherein we are changing based on the industry where it's moving. We're changing based on the feedback. We have a huge set of customers in our preview program, 250 plus to be more precise. That's one of my core jobs. I run those preview programs for Common Data Service, and really rich feedback that we get from those guys, from all of our customers there, which drives some of the innovation here. So I must mention, a lot of these things are always in flux, and we're releasing every 2 weeks. That's the speed that we can go. And Power BI, Flow, Power Apps, as I've already talked about this, they just seamlessly work with the Common Data Service. So a pretty popular kind of diagram. If you kind of get this into your head, you kind of get a nutshell of how things work with CDS. Wondering if I should just start demoing and cover these slides just through the demo. Just to cover some of these things, like the common data model, this is showing more details about what entities are, what are how it's kind of grouped in field groups, and I'll talk more about it just directly with the demo. So let's do that. So if you go to web.powerapps.com, that's how you get access to CDS, or Common Data Service. I believe a lot of folks whom we work with typically are aware of this portal, web.powerapps.com.
So
you get there.
Being a part of is this a part of the Power Apps solution, or is this, so is it an Office product, or is it the Dynamics product, or is it within everything? Is it between?
Yeah,
everything?
I mean, it's so amazing, right? At Microsoft, we actually taught people to kind of think like that, hey, which part of Microsoft do you come from? So just to give you a little kind of background, I mentioned this earlier as well. We are from the business application group. And to give you some idea, the business application group has the Dynamics 365 suite of products, so covering the AX and CRM set of products. It also has Power Apps, Power BI, Flow. I hope I'm not missing out any service now. So that's kind of the world that we are in, or that we kind of predominantly a part of. So that explains why when you go to web.powerapps.com, you would access CDS as well. Does that kind of give you a picture?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
Great. So overall umbrella, if you really want to know, it's under the CNE umbrella of Microsoft, so the Cloud and Enterprise.
Scott Guthrie, right?
Yes. This is what entities look like. As you can tell, I have a lot of custom entities as well, some interesting ones. We love to build applications. So we've built applications. Even one of our colleagues received some good news of becoming a dad. We built an application just to track some dollars for him. So anyway, so that was called the Breaking Dad app. So so this one, as you can tell, the type is standard. This is an example of a standard app. I like to kind of demo product. I think that's pretty. I have some affinity to some of these standard entities as well, as you can tell. You can search for it too, but just know where it is. So this is an example of a standard entity. Relationships. This is where, and again, a commonly asked question. If you have multiple entities and you want to create a relationship between entities, you can certainly do that. And this is exactly where you would do it. This is an example of the standard entity product, which has existing relationships with product category. You kind of make sense. Like if you're building an application depending on which showcases all your products, you want to be able to kind of put them under product category. So it makes sense to have a relationship there. And organization, to say which part about organizations you're from. So this is where you kind of create relationships. Very, very powerful way of doing it. And on the top right, that's how you add relationships. Sorry. Field groups. Again, a very cool way, some quick tip to remember. Field groups is typically what you use when you're building a Power App. You typically, if you have done it before, if you're new to it, you typically get like three screens, right? The main, the window, the details screen, and the edit screen. This is how kind of any app is built, any mobile app, so to speak. So you may have like hundreds of fields in your entities, but you probably just want to display like say 5 of them. So if you toggle something like the default card and set which fields you want to show, this is how the app would launch. It will typically show those fields, and you can just play around. You can always adjust it, but it's just a way of showing that if you want to build applications quicker, faster, this helps expedite the process. You can, of course, change it. You can customize it as much as you want. So that explains some of the field groups. Data. So a lot of our entities have some dummy data behind it. This is our way of telling you that, hey, we have standard entities, so you can test it out of the box. It's a cool way to talk for a few minutes so that the data shows up. So if you notice that. So this product entity has a bunch of data. If I were to build an app, which is right here, if I click that button, it will go through a couple of steps, and within no time we can have a Power App ready, which will show you the different type of speakers and the description for it, and whatever other field that I want to show, most likely the selling unit price. So again, this is a way for you to test the common data service, start building mobile applications right out of the box. There is one other piece I want to show, which is pick list. In any mobile applications, you may remember like there's need for like a drop down. That's probably the easiest way to explain. So pick list is, think of it as drop down. So if you look at the status pick list,
these are basically what we call enums.
Enums, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that was the other name for it. Isn't there a okay? Yeah, status. So this is again a very simple out of the box pick list. Which has an active, inactive status. You can put that, you can use a drop down to kind of toggle between those. So that's what pick list is. Perspectives, I'll just quickly go over it. There are some more slides, but regardless of whether we touch those slides or not. If you ask me after data integration, what is the most popular feature in CDS, it is exactly this. So we have a Power BI connector for CDS. If you remember in the previous slides, I said you use Power Apps if you want to take action. That's when you build an app using Power Apps. You want to automate some processes, business processes, you use Flow. You use Power BI to gain some of those insights, and very popular service. So we have a Power BI connector for CDS. So just think about the possibilities of one set of data at the very core, a Power App on it, which takes action on the data, a Flow talking to exactly the same data, which is doing some process automation, and a Power BI connector, which is kind of showing you the insights of, again, that same data. So on one end, you might be inserting data, and on the other end, you're looking at the live insights from that new data. So perspectives is what we have out-of-the-box perspectives. It's just something that you connect to from Power BI. It is, you can choose one entity as a root entity and have relationships through it and kind of expose that in Power BI. So I have actually built an application, a Power App. This is based on a real customer scenario. They wanted us to kind of showcase a simple application, a project requisition application, which is, there are like 3 personas in their company, wherein one person submits the project through a mobile application. They may typically pick the dollar amount, the type of project. The second persona comes in and the first persona may even submit. The second persona comes in and submits the request. If everything looks right, if all the information is correct, they may submit that project request, because typically in a company there are multiple people who have to go through a project detail before they approve it clearly. So there are these processes, and that's where flow would come in, and I'll show that to you. So one person submits the project or creates and submits the project, the other person submits it for approval, and finally, in this case, I'm just showing one person, but it could be multiple people who review those requests and approve or deny those requests just through email. So let's go into it. So as I said, it's a pretty simple kind of application. This shows you all the requests, the project requests that this construction company called Contoso Builders have. So they typically get requests for building a new freeway, a bridge construction, office space. It's not just about the fanciness of images. This is just to also show that we have support for images built into CDS. Again, a very, very popular feature. We released this probably a month, 2 months back. It used to be there before we changed that to an Azure blob type to store images. One of my colleagues, Vijeta, he put a blog out there, and instantaneously people started picking on it, because again, it's a very cool way. Like, you want these kind of rich images to show up in your application, so it's very easy to do that. So if you want to add a request, and at the top it just shows the total number of projects, what is in draft, which one is in review, how many are approved, and have you rejected. I'm sure some of these could be rejected too. So if you have to add a new request, and this is where I'm talking about the persona coming in and adding a new request, and say you're building a freeway. I know, it sounds fancy. So let's just call it freeway project. Description is building a freeway. Location.
Oh, please put it in Norway.
Norway. There you go. I was about to ask you where you were. So and say how many? 50 million? 50. And the start date. What I haven't showed you, and this is another request that we often get, in some of these things, they want some validation. Like, you should not be able to pick a date which is before a certain month, before a certain time period. Now, I'm not doing that here, but we have some of those validation pieces kind of getting into preview, so that you could easily set that as you add fields into CDS. So I'm not showing it here, but I'm just saying that's definitely in the works. Okay, I say Jan, and Contoso Builders are pretty amazing as to how fast they can build a freeway. So let's say the completion time is September 26th, right? And I can say the project manager is Alan. This project manager field is based on a relationship. So I created a custom entity called project request. I had some fields inside it, and I created a relationship with an existing entity called project manager. So the dropdown that you see is based on that relationship. So again, a pretty cool way if you want to use some existing entities.
I'm gonna throw in a question while you're picking a picture.
Sure.
You could basically persist any type of binary file. It could be like a PDF or a document or a spreadsheet or what have you.
So you can have a link to PDFs.
Okay.
The inherent support for documents is coming.
Okay.
So as you can tell, like, many customers have asked for this. So that's being worked upon. So it should be coming. It's not in preview yet, so I don't want to overpromise, but it's definitely in the works.
Yeah, with the introduction of image, basically, then you suddenly get binary large files, but then you need to specialize by type. So images is first.
Yeah, and potentially the scenario for storaging files is not in CDS, but rather elsewhere, like whatever document archive.
Yeah, a document. Yeah, exactly. You want a variable length, large sort of blob in order to deal with those kinds of storage needs.
Right.
Yeah, and like you asked me about building blocks earlier, so I can tell you, like, thinking out loud. When you start building some of these things, you have to often ask, like, there are many people who have tried to solve this problem. So do we always want to solve the problem of storing something and retrieving it differently than somebody else in the same company trying to store and retrieve? So maybe we use some other services, maybe we build it on our own. So these are typically what happens when you start building some of these services, kind of just to put it out loud. So this is done. I submit it, and this should show up under Freeway project. Okay. There you go. So Freeway
there's
project.
one in drafts right there.
Right there. Yep. So if I look at the details, and if you remember, I told you there's always a list screen, a detail screen, and an edit screen. So this is the detail screen. So now I'm the second persona who looks at it saying that, okay, did Mr. Persona 1 fill out the right details? Yes. Oh, pretty awesome. It's in Norway. Very cool people there, and I would love to do that. $50 million. Love this. So everything looks great. Let's submit for approval. Now, what you have seen so far is a Power App on CDS. When I hit submit, this is what happens. It just sent an email using the flow. This is where flow kicks in. Not automatically, I set it up, wherein the flow is now taking that information and sending an email to what we call the third persona, which is the approver. So if I go back to my emails, this is what it shows up as. So request, and I have actually, you can, in Flow, you can actually put in, customize it using rich HTML and whatnot. So I've just kind of done some decent fancy stuff. So you could say it's marked with high importance, request for your input. You can all customize all of this information. So I just picked up whatever I wanted. And you can even have an attachment, and that was pretty cool. In fact, this is something, when I built the application like a month back, at that time, I don't recall seeing an attachment option. Now, even that's available. So that's how quickly things are changing. So you can have an attachment which kind of gives them guidelines of whether they should approve or how they should approve. So just think of it along those lines. And now I've received it, and I say, hey, I would love to go build a freeway in Norway, and I so approve it. So I go approve it.
This is the flow approval process, right? So
exactly.
This is a part of the flow framework with the approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now it says the response approved has been successfully registered. So which means now, in theory, this project should change, right? And even if I go to approved, this project should show up there. All right, this is approved. So again, it's a pretty simple app, but a very compelling use case. There have been other customers who wanted something similar, but they have like 4 levels of approvals. And I think we can appreciate that depending upon how large your business is. So you can do flows for some of those business automation, and you can have Power Apps to do some of these basic pieces. All of this sitting on CDS. So going quickly back to my, I also mentioned the Power BI. I'll just quickly show you. What I did is, if you remember perspectives, I just picked one of those standard perspectives, and I'm just showing that to you. It doesn't seem as all cool, but this is typical. You do a get data, you connect to the online service called CDS, which will show up as a beta item today because this is still in preview. And you can use some of those standard perspectives that is kind of shipped out of the box, and you can build some cool graphs. So let's add something else, a total amount. So yeah, I mean, this kind of showcases Power BI also talking to CDS, and I'm basically working with a sales order entity. So
yeah, and here you can see the complexity of the the query, where it actually has some subqueries where you aggregate data underneath them, and they're grouped as folders here. It looks like
exactly. And what you see here is it is a set of entities. Though the perspective could be blah, it is a set of entities that is exposing because it's connected to multiple. So it makes up for a very, very compelling kind of scenario. So sorry, let me go back. I want to make sure I covered all the points. We have definitely customer stories. You may have read this article about Dun Bradstreet, who are working with CDS. I won't go into the details of all the things that they are doing. It's an article available on Forbes, I believe, if you just look up for DNB. They are into customer profiling. They have a way to kind of give those points to customers, various customers. So they are working very closely with the CDS our group, so to put some of that information from their end, so that tomorrow, if other customers kind of sign up for CDS, they can avail of the information in DNB, provided they have the license for it, through CDS. So I would let you guys kind of read up the article. Just look for Dun Bradstreet on Forbes, and you should find that.
We'll put the link down below. It's so you don't have to.
Yeah, I'll actually, as we go through the demo, I'll actually get the link as well.
Yep.
I want to make sure I cover some other pieces. Cirque du Soleil, they are also using, as you can tell, it's a pretty cool looking Power App. They're using this for some of their internal, when they have these tours happening in Cirque du Soleil, they are using these Power Apps, just to name a few customers. If you remember when I had shown you the data column, the data field, there's a place up there which says open in Excel. You can click on that. It will open the Excel add-in, and you can see all this data in Excel. A lot of people love to work that way. So just so you know, we have those powerful add-ins kind of built in.
But that is pretty similar to the add-in that we have in Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, right?
Yes, sir.
Good. Is it based on the same framework?
No.
Well, just the application is the same.
There are similarities for sure.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
So I'll take you through a quick overview of the security model we have in the Common Data Service. We'll talk high level. We'll get into some pieces that touch with Power Apps and Flow by the notion of an environment that we live in. And then when we get to the end of that, I'll take you through a demo and show you kind of those pieces in action. So at a high level, what can you secure? You can secure at the database level. You can secure your objects or entities within that database, and even down to individual records within those entities. And that's a preview that's going on now. So at the database level, we have two modes you can think of your CDS running in. We have an open mode where there's no security evaluated. And think of this as a development test. I want to go play around. I don't want to take the time to configure security. I want to be able to share things easily. And once we finalize on the app what it's going to look like, then I'll set security once just for the final product. So once I'm transitioning into kind of production, I'll put the CDS into a restricted mode. This will enable all the security checks, security is evaluated, and we'll enforce these kind of protections we talk about through from any connection that's coming into the CDS. So we're in restricted mode now. Our entities can be secured. You can define your kind of basic CRUD operations. So I can do create, read, update, and delete all independently. We build these into permission sets, which we'll get into as a way of kind of reusing this object level security. And then finally, we get record level security coming in, which gives you kind of the most fine-grained controls. So we do things for ownership, what we call principal, pick list, which Sabin had talked about earlier. We also do things for business unit, think hierarchical type dimensions that come into play. So the way I manage these, there's kind of two primarily avenues for this. We have a portal, which we'll demo today. This is kind of your IT manager, kind of a simple UI, or if I have an ISV and I want to build my own application with its separate own administrative UI as well, I can do all the same things through the SDK. So we're really giving you the power to kind of take this as you please here. As mentioned before, it's going to apply to all endpoints. So when I set up my security for CDS, Sabin showed you a Power App. We're going to enforce it there. I have a flow applied to that same entity. The same access rights are going to be controlled there. Anything that's coming in will have the same security. So I really can define it once and have it be applied throughout. So how do I go about actually setting these security? There's kind of two big chunks that we kind of break this down to. So we have environment roles, which is your top level, think of all my objects. So I have Power Apps, I have flows, I have the CDS, kind of all the resources sit within an environment. I have an environment admin who can administer these things, just you can manage security, you can set up the configuration. My environment makers is the persona who actually builds resources. So Sabin showed you an app he had built. He's an environment maker. He builds that Power App. He defines a flow that anyone in the organization can use. So that's kind of a high level administrative piece. And then when we get to runtime, how do we access the data? How are things used within that, right? So we have user roles there. We give you two out of the box, the organization user and the database owner. We'll get into those kind of briefly here in a second. These are just to help you kind of get started and make the flows easier. So the out of the box roles, we have the database owner. Think of this as your system admin. He is the master role. He'll have access to all the data all the time. It ensures that nothing ever gets lost. There's always someone there who can come and recover it. The other big thing to call out is they have the power to create and change entity schema. So think of, I have a great out-of-the-box entity. We have a project or maybe an account. One field is missing for my company. The database owner can go and add that field. Now, any of my makers can come in and build off of that without having to worry about manipulating the schema or potentially breaking someone's app. At the far end of the spectrum, we have the organization user, and I'll make the equivalent for those coming from operations. This is like our system user there. It's the base role that's assigned to everyone. And this basically is for our public data that I want everyone in the company to see. It makes it very simple for me to go and give access to those things. The example I like to use, if I build a Power App that shows me the cafeteria menu for today, right? I can go and I can see, maybe I can order things. Everyone in the company should be able to see that and use that. So the permissions to use it, I'll place in the organizational user and everyone just gets it very easily. And between those two ends of the spectrums, we have user roles. So we support building custom roles up. So here I'm showing you an example for a sales clerk, which I'll actually go into during the demo. So at the top level, we have a sales clerk role. Within that, I can put in permission sets. And this permission sets are really the building blocks of the security model. The notion here is I can clump all the access to entities I want to use, say for a Power App, into one permission set, and then I can give that to all the roles who should be using that Power App or flow or ISV built application from the SDK. Those permission sets contain your entity access. So each entity I want to add, I can define in my individual CRUD access levels. And then we can add RLS policies that hang off of each of those individual CRUD permissions. So for my sales clerk, I have a permission set allows them to maintain the account entity. Here it has a collection of account entities. And let's say in my example, I only want them to view active accounts or to restrict something to the current user or the owner of a record. I can do that as well.
I have to say that this looks suspiciously familiar. Is there?
Yeah, if you're familiar with AX and operations, it is, you can draw the kind of relations here. AX, you would have had kind of role, duty, privilege. Here we're saying role, permission set, and you kind of have the entity access. So you can think of a permission set kind of as that between a privilege and duty. I'll say, strictly speaking, it's probably closer to the privilege for those operations folks. So a layer of abstraction has been taken out, and this is just kind of a simplicity's sake of we think of as individual building blocks, where as a duty we set a collection of tasks. So now this is more targeted towards an app because we have a number of them rather than one single kind of operation app that we live in. But you can certainly draw the relations there. Yeah, similar kind of build up. Cool. So we'll step into a demo in a moment, but I want to kind of set some background context for actually building a policy. So the way we think about this is we have a field and a condition. So the example I'll use is account again. So a field determines the individual field in a record that we're going to apply the condition to. So I have an account. I want to look at, say, the status, and I only want to show active accounts. So I can choose an individual field and apply a condition to that. And the condition is actually the policy that you'll build. And the nice thing here is, say, I choose an operator and a value that equates to some sort of basic piece of information in the CDS. So here I'm choosing a pick list, and I'm saying the account is active. I can apply that to a field on the account entity or any other entity that uses that same pick list. So I can reuse these policies. And there's the piece where that really comes beneficial is where we have business units, things that are more monolithic, where I define them once, and if I change them, it's going to impact throughout the company. This allows me to change the business unit in one place. The policies will update, and I don't have to go and change that in each of my individual permission sets and roles. So we'll just reflect that through. It kind of becomes a single action rather than duplicating those efforts across. So I mentioned this, the pieces we have simple equals, not equals. For business unit we support is descendant of. As we build out more policy types, these operations will expand for each dimension that we support. So another kind of quick piece I'll drive home here is the way we combine policies becomes important because that directly impacts the records that are returned. So simply state policies in the same permission set are ANDed together. And this can be on one access right or across entities. Policies in different permission sets are effectively ORed together. The takeaway here is you'll see records if it passes all the conditions in a single permission set. So I can have a more restricted permission set, but if I'm granting you access in another permission set that is fuller, gives me a larger set, that larger set's going to win out.
Hmm. So it's basically aggregating up your your access levels to the highest one. Yeah.
Yep.
Also, suspiciously familiar, but
yes. Yeah. Yep. The concepts are kind of familiar throughout.
Yep.
So I'll change gears here. I'll jump into a demo. So I've jumped over for our demo. Here I'm in the portal that Sabin was showing you earlier. I'm going to switch into the admin center. You can say admin.powerups.com, or it's linked to if you go into our little settings where I can jump over to the admin center. And I have a session here that's kind of up and running. So I'll land in my admin center. I choose the environment that I'm working in. You can have a collection of environments. These contain a CDS. So I'll dive into my preview environment. So now I've loaded in here, and a quick disclaimer. So I have preview rights. If you're in our preview program, please send us a message. We can put the details in the description. That will give you the preview pieces of policies and dimension. If you're not, you won't see those pieces. So I'm in the security section of the admin center. I have all kind of my subsections, including those in previews. Environment roles, we kind of talked about briefly here. You can just jump in and assign users. We can do the same thing with user roles. So that's the example we'll walk through. So I'm going to build up the security around kind of a sales app. So I'm going to piece together what's needed for the sales clerk. So here I've created a custom role. I can show you a new role. This is a kind of a simple piece. You just create a name and description, and that will drop it into the list. So I'll show you with what I'm already working with here. So I jump into a sales clerk. I can assign users to this. So here I'm already in this list. We have a lookup field. This is actually tied to AAD. So if I were to start looking for, say, Lance here, as I type, we're going to start going off of your AAD tenant. We'll find users in there. I can do groups as well. So here's just my security team that I'm a part of has also assigned this role. So I can put users in, and then giving users actually access to the data is done through permission sets. So here, it's a similar view. I have my McCain and account dependencies that we looked at kind of in that previous slide. I can add existing permission sets as well. So if I wanted to say, add a view for the account group, I can add anything as I go. And as you type, we'll filter down that list to what's relevant to you. So now I'm going to kind of drill down that stack. So we have a role. We'll take kind of the maintain account as our example. So from this admin center in a permission set, I'll be able to see the list of all the entities that are within the common data service once this loads here. So you can see I have my account entities right at the top. I'm providing kind of full access to account, and I only need read on account contact and account group. So a simple kind of check of the box will give me access. Any changes I make, I save those and they're kind of pushed out to the world. We also give you policies, and this is how we drill down into the record level here. So if I choose to add a policy on this, I'll get a new form, and it lets me add additional conditions to that access. So here I'm in an account. I can choose the actions I want to apply a policy to. So I'll say, hey, let me put it on, let's say, read, update, and delete. And we talked earlier about having active accounts only. So maybe in my company, I only want accounts that are active to be touched. If I mark them as inactive, they're kind of in a dormant state, or we've retired that contact, let's say. So I can choose a field to pivot off of. So here I'm going to look up that status field, and then I can assign a policy that I've existing or create new. So here I have an active one, accounts that has already been created. I could drop that in and assign that. That's no problem. To kind of give you the full experience, we'll go ahead and recreate that. So I'll choose to create a new policy. This is going to give me experience here to build this up kind of piece by piece. So we'll just say, active accounts, new. We'll just say this is a description. You can drop in here anything that you want. And now we get to the crux of building the policy. So we support 3 types today. Principal is a user principal. So this is your ownership type scenarios, the one responsible for a record. So here I can pick a principal, that would be a user. Pick list is like a drop down. So this is your enum equivalent. Maybe I have a department list. It could be regions or individual status. Business unit, think of this as org structure, maybe cost accounting, things that are hierarchical. So we have business unit as the first instance of this, where I can tie records in the CDS database. I stripe them by business unit. And then any of those fields, I can apply a business unit policy to say, hey, I'm working in the IT consulting group. Only show me records that are intended for this group. For my example here, we'll just use pick list because it's the most straightforward. So I've said, hey, I want a pick list type. I'm going to go choose the individual pick list I want to use. I'm going to use account status. I'll say I want the value to be equal to active. So here I've pieced together, and this is the condition piece that we talked about earlier. So I've defined the condition. I say, hey, some field must equal active. So I'll create this. This will have spun it up. Now I can see my new ones in there. Just select. I'll choose assign, and now I can see that I have the policy assigned on each of these pieces. And actually, before I save this, I want to kind of give you the proof before I jump in. So I'm jumping over now to a test account. I have a sales app. I'm going to jump in, and I'll show you the list of accounts before I go in and apply these policies. So here you can say I have a long list. I have active and many more inactive. So I'll jump back and I'll save this guy. I'll let that go through. And now when I come back over into my sales app, and I'll do a kind of quick refresh here to make sure we get those changes.
We're talking about record level. That's record level security.
Yeah, so my test app, I had the object level was assigned so you could see the full entity. So he was seeing everything in account and the related entities. So what I've done is now I've said, hey, let me scope down that object level access from the entity to only the records that are active, right?
Yep.
So if I have a manager, I can give him full access so he can, reactivate accounts. But this is my sales clerk. I only want him focusing on things that are active. So I can scope him so he only sees those records. So I'll jump back into our account list. And now you can see that all the inactive records are filtered out server side, so he can't see that. If there's any, personal data in there from those accounts that we want to retire and push out, those are now all protected.
You saw that was actually started off with. It started off in the beginning. It said no data in the beginning, and then
Yes.
it's kind of
So you'll see the no data is kind of our blank slate. So the app renders, and then we reach out and pull the data, and it will get populated. So that no data that we got a glimpse of was just before the data had completed loading.
It's not a filter.
Now, with what Sabin said earlier, this means that also if you were to run any Power BI reports against the same data sets, the same permissions would be effective.
Right. So in preview, that's what we're actually working on as we speak. So for the preview here, it's not mapped to Power BI. You can define these through the TOM model, which is how Power BI defines them. We'll push the users in. Those pieces will be building up, but that's not included in this preview today.
Okay. Now, I'm a little bit tempted to ask, and I think it's been asked before, the underlying technology here is, and maybe Fredrik alluded to it, because there are some similarities with Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. The underlying technology here is actually the same thing, isn't it?
So underlying technology is actually new. There's a new security service that's running. So we drew concepts from the ERP space, which operations is built off of. You'll see things coming in that are based out of CRM system. Business unit is very heavy there. That was a piece of feedback that we got that was kind of heavily requested. So you're really seeing kind of a conglomeration of pieces that we need to reflect. And the reason for that is we pull data in from all these various sources, right? So we need a security mechanism that can encompass all of those so people can put the protections in place that they need.
And also you mentioned how we can get access to the preview sets. You do that by the tenant or by the environment, or what is the fidelity there?
So we'll give an email alias that you can message to, and we have a couple different preview groups. The one for RLS is by the environment. Okay. And the notion for this is when you request us to be in the preview, we'll tell you, hey, this is a preview feature. We do it at the environment level, so you can kind of segregate your data. If you are, we're not saying put production data in this one while it's in preview, because it's a security feature. We want to make sure it's hard and validated, which is why we have this extensive preview for it. So we put it at your environment so you can give us a non-production set.
Right.
There.
So basically, all you need is that unique GUID in the URL for the environment.
Exactly. We can get your URL and we're good to go from there.
Yeah. Cool.
So I'll kind of do the quick wrap up there. The proof is in the pudding. Our records are gone. Security is applied. The one piece I'll drive home here is I've shown a Power App. If the flows in Sabin's exactly would have been applied the same way. So let me kind of pull back and I'll hand it over to Lance.
So this it's useful, as Sabin noted earlier, to kind of put some context around this. We announced an umbrella brand actually for Dynamics, which is Dynamics 365, and that's the preface to a bunch of names. So Dynamics 365 for sales, for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition, for financials, or for Finance and Operations Business Edition, I guess as it's called now, project service automation, et cetera, and people expect all of these products to work together, and unfortunately they don't. And the data integration feature is about making them and helping them work together. And there's several phases to how we're going to make this work. And the first step along that path is just simple basic data integration. This is the kind of integration you would get if you were to go buy an off-the-shelf product from companies that enable integration. I'm not really talking so much about middleware so much, but middleware products do this somewhat. But we want to, that's one step. There's additional steps along this path. We can do a process integration, we can do near real time. And these are all things that we're pursuing. The first step is data integration, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And so we'll start first with what can be integrated. While we have a whole number of Dynamics products, we're starting basically with Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition and Dynamics 365 for Sales. And then you'll note that I'm actually part of the Common Data Service team. And what we do is we integrate through the Common Data Service, both directions. And that allows the data to be a copy of the data to sit in the middle as basically a cached copy or a read-only version of the data, in particular master data that might exist in operations or sales. And that facilitates the writing of applications that you want to do. It makes it a lot easier. So for example, if I wanted to create an application that kept track of workplace incidents or something like that, I would want to know about people, I would want to know about buildings, and all of those things are already captured in operations. And I could just go ahead and reference that. Rather than create a new table for each of those and bring the data in, that would simply be there, and I could simply write my application. In addition to a read-only status, we're looking at making it work such that you could directly edit the data while you're in the Common Data Service as well for the data that's passing through. But the first step is a read-only copy of the data that you can use when you're building applications. And then in addition, as after we finish the basics around operations and sales, we'll move on to other kinds of applications. And I think we talked briefly a little bit about bringing data in via Power Query, and that's part of what that story is about. Okay, so this is an example of what we might do in terms of basic data integration. This is a specific scenario that we enable along the path. This is called Prospect to Cache. And in here, you can see a number of entities that we will sync between operations and sales. So on the top, you see sales, and you see it going along a business path of lead, opportunity, quote, and then the process moves on into something that's traditionally finished in operations. You have order fulfilled, etc. But in order to make that work, you have to kind of synchronize at least the entities, for instance, of customer/account in sales and product from operations to each other. And that's so that when you go to create the sales order in sales, for instance, you have the right product information. And then when you synchronize the sales order down into operations, the customer is there as well. So all of that information just works. Now, I talked briefly about account and product at kind of a high level, but in the middle you can see CDS with a bunch of red text here. We have customer, and when we bring over customer, we're bringing over contact and address. When we talk about product, we're bringing over product, unit of measure, price, and currency, for instance. So there's a lot of satellite information that comes along with it as well. But this is an example of a scenario that we could automate or help automate. Now, the way that we do this, the way that we can do data integration is through what we call business keys, or natural keys as they're sometimes called. And so for integration, we require that there be a business key on the objects that are in the various systems, and that it's unique across the entire business. And just, if I call, for instance, if I want to reference or identify, for instance, say a car, I have a VIN number, and I would use that VIN number through all of my applications. The same thing is true here. If I have a way of identifying a customer in CRM, I want that same way of identifying the customer in operations. And then it gets resolved by virtue of the fact that I don't run into duplicates from that perspective, or duplicate versions of customers, at least from an integration perspective, you might have duplicate customers for a different reason, but at least they're using the same number to resolve. And one of the issues that we run into as we do this is that sales or Dynamics 365 for sales often lacks business keys. So we will actually add a business key. You can see here in the example on the left, we have account number, which is a field that is in CRM, and we have co-opted it, for instance, made it unique, made it required, and then make sure it has to be populated in order for it to flow. And it moves over into, on the right, you can see the CDS account ID field that it's moving into. And in general, for our data integration story for CRM, we have typically a solution that goes along with a given a given scenario like prospect to cash that you install that puts the right kinds of fields if they don't exist, or makes the existing fields that we can use unique and required. All right, so the way we do this is through a series of projects that enable these various business scenarios, and I just talked briefly about prospect to cash, but you can imagine that there are two kinds of, or multiple kinds of prospect to cash depending on the business needs of your company. For instance, in some companies, I'll call this a front office prospect to cash, which is the one I described in the image a few moments ago, which is that I have the salesperson has all of the information necessary to write the sales order. And so they have the product information, they have everything that's necessary. They can calculate taxes, they can calculate freight, and they can basically give a final sales order. The salesperson alone can do that. And once it's done, it flows down into operation for invoicing and fulfillment, etc. Another version of this story, though, however, goes, I start in CRM, and the salesperson doesn't have quite all the information necessary. They can really only provide a quote, for instance, and that is what flows into operations. And then the details around it, say if you're doing custom work of some kind, it needed to be priced out based on inventory items or specific work that needed to be done, materials, and then the sales order gets kind of filled out as the work gets done. I call that a back office kind of prospect to cash. You want to be able to enable both kinds of projects or both kinds of prospect to cash, and the way we do that is through projects that you can customize. So our goal then is to provide templates that can be used to build projects or to initiate or to create projects, and we'll focus on the most common work patterns, but then they can be customized as necessary. And we'll work in a kind of a priority order. We've already released the basic entities around prospect to cash, and in fact, as of yesterday, we released the rest of the entities necessary to do a back office prospect to cash. We'll be working on a front office prospect to cash now, and then also along with prospect to cash, we also have field service and project service automation, which is also coming along in terms of scenarios.
And I heard you also were looking into project. Oh, you said project automation. No, you said field.
Project service. Yeah. PSA. Yeah, PSA? Exactly. Yep.
So that's going to integrate to the project module. Moving across with. Yeah, we can talk about that later, maybe. Hopefully, that's.
Sure. What questions do you have about that? I can tell you a little bit right now.
Super, because is it going to synchronize things like tasks and projects and activities and these types of things? Is the WBS going to be a part of that, or are we just talking like the projects in themselves?
So the PM that's working on this is John Burrows, and on the CRM side, and it's Kim Nelson on the AX side. And yeah, I mean, they've been talking about, when I've heard them talk about that scenario, that's the scenario they own. And I've heard them talking about WBS and tasks and activities. I don't know what level, I mean, you're sort of, how should I say it? You're limited by the degree of granularity that exists in the other system, right?
Yeah.
There's typically going to be a greater level of granularity in one or the other systems, and then the system you're integrating with, you needs to have the right kinds of things to be able to, to flow either materials or billing or whatever.
Yeah.
And John's the one who has all of the details on that particular one.
Awesome.
But I know,
Yep.
but they're working on that. So like I said, in priority order, prospect to cash is the one we were doing first, and the back office version of that is now done as of yesterday. I'll show that when we get to the demo. And then field service and project service automation, PSA, is currently in progress.
Nothing else in the pipeline? The ... stands
Well, those are the
for-
ones I know of. Actually, retail is there. Talent is actually doing work as well. But those are the ones I know of off the top of my head.
All right.
All right. So what we do is we allow you to create projects, and the projects are customizable. We start with, as I mentioned, a set of predefined templates. You can easily extend them with attributes that we may have not included, or if you've customized either AX or CRM with additional attributes, you can go ahead and add them as well. You can define your own, and then you can easily administer them. You can schedule them, putting on a recurring scheduling basis. You can monitor them. We have some basic monitoring capabilities right now, and we're working on some more advanced monitoring functionality that should be coming in soon, in particular both dashboards and the ability to get email alerts. Right now you can run the projects and you can kind of see how they've done and investigate errors. One of the primary features that we use as well is something called connection sets. And basically a connection set stores a list of connections for use in a project. So if I'm moving from CRM through CDS to AX, I'll have 3 connections, then one for each of those systems. And once I've defined that list, then I can reuse that connection set as I create additional projects. I don't have to redefine that set of mappings for each project that I create. And a connection set is also where we store a list of organizational mapping. So for instance, if I'm going from a CRM all-up entity and I'm going through CDS and I'm going through an org unit of some kind and I'm moving into a legal entity, say USMF, and then I do the same thing, but I'm going to go to a legal entity called DAT, I can actually put the mappings in as part of what I have as my connection set. You may be familiar with the fact that when you create a connection to AX or CRM, it assumes an organizational unit. That's something you can actually specify as part of your connection. And then the final thing that we store as a part of the connection set is something called integration keys. And integration keys are effectively business keys, but in the case where, for instance, you have like in CRM, you're using a non-business key as the primary identifier for a table. Maybe it's a GUID as it is in the case of CRM, or it's some other field where it's just a number. But the real key, the business key, the key that's of interest is just an alternate key on that same table. When you go do lookups, for instance, if you have, for instance, a sales invoice and you want to look up currency and you're looking up via a GUID, but the real value, the currency code is in that table, the integration keys tell us how to go get that currency code out of that transaction table. And we store that as part of the connection set as well so that you don't have to redefine it once you've done it. And so finally, before we kind of move into finally, before we move into the demo, we're doing data synchronization today. The next thing that we're going to be doing, and hopefully we'll have enough time for this, to show a little bit about Power Query and how we'll enable sort of a rich query and filtering via Power Query. We already use in our product today something, the language that Power Query uses, which is M, which is the underlying language of PQ. We already use that as part of the data integrator. We just have not exposed the Power Query UI yet on it. Also on our backlog is process synchronization, more direct updates that won't require some sync. So in some cases, for instance, AX would write directly, or CRM would write directly to the CDS, so you don't actually have to do an update. But you would still want to update for working with external other systems. And then you'll see more apps that are built directly on top of the CDS, as is, for instance, the talent application. All right, let me kind of move over here and let's show a few things. let's start here. So this is sales, and I have in here, I only have about 25. This is a new CRM instance, and this has the CRM solution that was put into it. I normally do this demo with about 200 or so customers, and they're all prefixed with the name ST, so it makes it easier to go delete them in AX once you've done a synchronization. So when I practiced this morning, I noticed that I didn't have a great sample set, but you can see this data here. And now let's go to AX, and you'll see it actually, because I've already run the synchronization once, but I'm going to show it again. Here we go, right here. Oops, let me go back here for a second. Let's find a customer. So here we have is ABC, I guess, or something like that. So then if we come over here and we do something like, I want to see ABC star, look in here. So here we go. So this has already been synchronized over from sales. And the way that worked, the way that happened is if we go back over here and we go start here. Now this is CDS. I'm going to start up here though. And you can see that I have a bunch of connections that have been provisioned inside of the Power Apps, what we call the Maker Portal. We call this Power Apps Portal the Power Apps Maker Portal. And you can see that we have a bunch of connections that have been provisioned, one of which goes to sales and the other of which goes to operations. And then down here, you can see I have a bunch of entities, and one of which is account. And if I just click on account here, you can, if I click on data here and wait for a few seconds, 7 seconds, I think. There we go. You'll see the data that's in here. Now let's go ahead and open this in Excel.
So we're working now with a data set that is synchronized from CRM through the data, the common data service, and then back into Dynamics.
It is gone. That's exactly right. It's moved. The sync I did earlier, and I'm going to show an actual sync here in a second, but I'm going to walk through. I'm going to repopulate CDS. Well, I can populate both of them. I won't do anything on the AX side, but I'm going to delete all the data here in CDS because I can easily get at it here. This is an easy way to go ahead and see the data that's in CDS. Here we have down here, it's retrieving the metadata.
This OData connection, I pulls
this. Yeah, it depends on the, yes, basically it's OData is the way to think about it, but OData has some bulk right, and when that exists, we take advantage of it. So here we see the, let's sort A to Z, here we go. So here we see this data that was brought in. There's a few extra columns here from a previous integration. Where'd they go? ST, well, maybe not. So just gonna go ahead and delete these guys, and we'll publish. And I think it's gonna fail for 3 of them because there's some foreign key references going on for them.
So how many records can you pull through this per hour? If you
here's 3. Well, we've done, we did 50,000, 100,000 in a couple of minutes. So it's really a question of, in the end, this will mostly be a question of the service and how much it throttles the input of data. Because services need to make sure that their service is responsive. We're using, so this data has been updated here. If we go back to here and I hit refresh here, let's do that while I'm talking. So we're using a bulk, so there's the 3 that still hang around. We're using bulk movement of data. And in the end, for the most part, we're typically throttled by either AX or CM in terms of how fast we can get data in or out.
So it's not doing delta synchronization yet. It's still.
Well, actually, no, it does that as well. So the first sync. So actually, so you can see the data here. So now let's move over. I'll show that here in a second. So so you can see here, first of all, I created these connections. And secondly, you can see here in entities and accounts, you can see what data I've actually got. So this is what's actually in the CDS at this point. So now I switch over to the admin portal, and I ran this a little earlier. So, but when I ran it, it went fine into CDS. As you can see, there were 25 upserts. But then going into AX, there were some issues, and you can see what they were. And this has to do with the fact that there were some pick lists that were not populated correctly for one of the secondary address fields. And I leave that in here for the demo purposes. But what I wanted you to see here is if I come up a level, I can choose to run the project. And if I were to run this project right now, because there's no updates, it would only look at the data that had changed, and it wouldn't put anything into CDS because nothing has changed. But if I run the project with all data, then it will populate the entire thing again. I'm going to actually create another project, which was the same as doing it with all data. But you can see here by default, it does a Delta sync. And the reason we're still using a bulk API and a Delta sync is that in very large transaction kinds of volumes, you might have several hundred records that need to kind of move back and forth. And if you have latency issues and things like that, you need the data kind of to be safe. So let me walk through briefly what I did here. So if I were to create connections, this is what I was talking about earlier. I created this connection set. And here I have the connections for the 3 services that I'm working with. Here I have created a mapping between the CRM instance, an organization in the CDS, and the legal entity in operations.
This was one of the things that were pretty... When this came out that there was going to be an integration between CRM and Dynamics for operations, this was one of the points that people were skeptical about how you're going to solve. So it's nice to see that finally in place.
Oh yeah. And so you can add more. I could add more of these, and then once they're added, as you'll see in a minute when I go to create my project, I can choose which of these I use. The final piece is the integration key. I mentioned this briefly, I think I mentioned the use of, for instance, if I have a GUID lookup to transaction currencies, what's stored in my transaction table is a GUID, which has a reference to this table, which is transaction currencies. I can say, okay, that gets you to the right table and to the right row, but use this column, which is currency code, to flatten into the integration, so it's a code that goes across, not a GUID. So that's how this gets handled. And when Power Query comes along, you could do this by hand, but you won't need to if we have the metadata behind the scenes. So that's my connection set. So now if I'm in projects, I created this one this morning. I'm going to move this guy over here. So now I'm going to create a new project. And I'm going to sort on author here because we just released, I want to show this. So all of the ones that say Microsoft here, so the ones below, those are in progress. So don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain there. But you can see we have sales invoice that's just been released as of yesterday. This is invoices going. This is sales order. And you'll notice here specifically that it says finance and ops to sales. That's a particular direction, which means it's a back office story. It means I'm moving sales orders from finance and ops to sales. In a front office story, there'd be another version of this that says sales order, and it will say sales to finance and ops. So here's contacts to customers. Here's contacts, sales quotes. This one's still in preview. This will shortly be fixed. There was an org ID issue with this thing. Here's products which we had previously released, and accounts. And then there's version of these, one that just goes straight into CDS and the other one that goes all the way along the path from finance and ops all the way across to sales or the other direction. So I'm going to call this demo 201608. Today is the 16th, and I'll call it B because I already did one today. And I will select, let's do account across the board, just to replicate what I did this morning. And here I check, I select my connection set. So I could have, for instance, a test connection set, or I could have a production connection set, just depending on my needs for what I'm doing from an integration perspective. We didn't walk through the connection set setup, but one of the things we get to is a question around data privacy, because you can move data all around the world using this product. You just need a connection to the place you're going. So, okay, so I've done that, and I go ahead and pick my organizational mapping that I want to use for this integration. And here's my privacy and consent. Sorry, here we go. And we're going to go ahead and create this. Okay, and now this is created. Now that this is created, I can simply run it. And because it's a new product, a new project, if I simply run it, it will run with all data. And you saw me delete the data in the middle, so that should give you a sense for the fact that the CDS is empty at this point. When it gets to operations, because it's doing an upsert, it will either update or it will insert depending on whether or not the record is already there. This screen updates about every 20 seconds or so. So you know, it will update in a moment or so. It's going to pretty much have the same results that I showed you a few seconds ago. So while we're here, let me just point out that you can go ahead and choose to set this up on a recurring schedule.
How fast can it be set to? What's the minimum? Every minute. Okay.
Which we don't recommend, probably because it'll run. Actually, we put this thing in, if a project is running, it won't run a new one in the moment so that they don't have collisions. But you know, every 5 minutes is probably fine. It's not the same as near real time. Near real time is, I think, a bit of a different boat. But in the bulk update story, you know, every 5 minutes or so is probably fine. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, super, thanks.
Okay, good. Okay, so this thing is running. Let's see where it's at. It says it's already pushed its data into CDS. So if we come back here, I guess this is the previous one. This is the one I just opened, I guess. So if I hit refresh on this guy, yes. Whenever you say open in Excel, unfortunately, I had opened earlier, so there we go. So it's populated here, and as we go back here, we'll see that it's doing upserts, and so it's going to have pretty much the same results as what we saw back over here. So if we come up here, here we go. This is the one that's currently running. This is the one that did run. So again, you're going to get this kind of story right here. We're 25, and then these guys will have a few errors. And then this is something I can go investigate. If I go look at this field here in the field state, if I go back and look at my record, you'll see that I've got in my CRM field, I've populated the word WA and in the secondary address, and that's the issue. Okay, so that's kind of a quick tour of integration, but let me show you one more thing. So this is a Northwind OData feed, and if I come here, so I want to copy this guy here. I can show you another story that we have going. So if I go to, I'm in the Common Data Service here, and if I say new entity, in addition to creating a new entity from scratch, I can also choose to bring in data. Now this way of bringing in data will show up, or filtering data, the thing I'm about to show you. So this allows me to pick a data source. And so I have about 20 or so different data sources here. Power Query actually talks to about 75 different data sources, including OData, which is a lot of different kinds of sources, ODBC, and REST. So it's actually in over 100, easily into the hundreds, basically, depending on if you have a specialized ODBC driver or whatever. It can go to data that's on locally if you have a gateway. I'll show you that here in a second. You can see I have the gateway already installed. I'm going to go, instead of going to Excel locally though, I'm going to go to here to my OData source. And we have.
So this is pulling data externally from some type of data source. Could this be done for like EDI order?
It's pulling it from here, right? Yep. This is Northwind, basically, which is no data head.
Yep.
And normally doesn't take this long. Basically, it's doing a metadata call, and it's also doing a initial several thousand fields record get, so that we can see the actual data.
Yeah. So if you work with Power BI, you've done anything in Power BI, this is kind of the get data equivalent. It's exactly the same. So pulling in data is putting that in the hands of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It's not behaving.
It's in preview, so that's.
It is in preview. Yeah. It is in preview, but let's try it again. It's the classic software story.
So opening up for like your vendor or anybody who is a third-party data supplier to your organization could do this really quickly for postal address, global address. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's software, right? Do it again. So let's put this over here. So there's a bug. I hope it's fixed now. I'm going to pull in. They had a bug where if I pulled in the same entity twice, then it would die. So I'm not sure if. But here you can see the preview. So this is the standard sort of preview experience that you get with Power Query today. And I would get an error right here before, see all these things that are there. Okay, so this is not dying on me. I think I've run out of my luck is running out here. See, it's remembering all these previous queries I've done. But here I get all of the standard kinds of functionality that you would expect from Power Query. It's not all here yet, but you can see, for instance, that I can do some sorting. Eventually, the value filters will show up there. I can do transforms, the pivoting, unpivoting, replacing. I can group by, use first rows, headers. I can reduce rows, etc. All of the functionality that you would expect to find from Power Query will show up here. And the interesting thing is this filtering experience that I'm talking about right here will show up. Go here.
I think it's important to kind of note that when you do this the first time, so you go through and manipulate your data and you set up, you do a bunch of steps. Now, when you've done that, so that was stored as the Power Query in the M language. And when you run that again, it will perform those steps. You don't have to do them every time you pull that data.
Exactly.
So it'll be repeatable.
Actually, it'll store it as a data integration project is what it'll do. It'll store it as one of these. And because these have recurrence, because they have recurrence, and because they're projects, you can just kind of run them again. So if I come in here, for instance, imagine that as part of this page, I have the ability to open up the filter that I was just looking at for Power Query. Imagine that, not this page, excuse me, this page right here. When I'm looking at the mapping between why is this taking so long? There we go. When I'm looking at this mapping, imagine that I have another thing that allows me to bring up the filter UI, which would allow me to just basically see, whoops. I have to go to the right screen.
One back.
This one. Here we go. It would allow me to bring this screen up right here, and then I could go ahead and change that query, and that would filter the data that's coming in here on the left-hand side. And then I can just do some simple mappings, and then I can run it, and I can be on my way. Okay, so that kind of wraps up a tour of the basic functionality. Any questions?
We have a lot, so it will be because I see this as a base of using new integration scenarios, not only with internal business apps, but also across other entities like external EDIs, and would work also with gaining like standard data knowledge, for instance, like a zip code register or something like that. You can pull in, and that would get
Absolutely. You could bring in data from a lot of different sources into the CDS. You can imagine working with sources that are external to the company, inside of the company. There's, when you start talking about Dynamics as a player in a corporate ecosystem of systems, you always need data integration.
Yeah.
It's just ever present. And so this basically comes built in. It enables a lot of functionality sort of out of the box, in particular about getting AX and CRM to talk, but then also generally inside the corporation.
Yeah, you can have a file integration running. If you get a regular file or orders in by email, you can extrapolate that file and pull that through Flow and pull that into CDS, and that will again populate your orders. You can do smart things going that. But how about how many records can you have? How many? Is there a limit to number of entities and things like that?
Well, a project can contain, so we didn't get into that too much here. What I have here is a single entity that I'm bringing in. I can add an additional task, where I can say my task. I can bring in any other entities that I want and map them, and then I end up basically with a set of entities that I'm synchronizing. The volume. Again, we've done a couple hundred, 500,000 records. I think we did here not too long ago, and we did it in chunks of 100,000. So one of the things we're looking at is sort of enabling you to basically, because I think you want to do things in chunks of like 100,000 or something like that, so that the systems don't completely choke on the data coming in. And so you kind of basically gate it as you bring it in. So that's what we're doing around the volume story. We have reasonable size volumes, but we know we have to get up into the pretty big numbers. And the question is, how automated do we make it, really, more than anything else?
Yeah. Yeah, because I can imagine over time it will be populated with huge chunks of data in the live environment.
Yeah, doing financial transactions would probably not be the wisest thing. That would probably put you over the limit pretty quickly and slow it down.
Yeah,
right?
but even 10 years with sales orders.
Oh yeah. But are there any so maybe that's the question to you, Sabin. Are there any limits to the number of entities that you can have in a common data service in total, and how many records can you have per entity?
So let's put it this way: we haven't hit the limit per se. So we don't have a published number, but I think it's important to understand. I mean, the reason I say this is important is because we don't want to be, at least today, we don't intend to be another data warehouse. So we don't want to be in the business of storing gazillion amount of data. We see ourselves as an operational data store. And that's the kind of direction we are going. This is not to say we won't change, because one thing that was, if you heard from my presentation, more specifically Matthew's and Lance's presentation, there's a lot we do based on feedback. There's no point talking about a digital transformation world, data-driven world, wherein we ourselves are not data-driven. So we, based on customer feedback, we constantly change. So tomorrow, if we want to go in a different direction, if we want to be, hey, we are scalable today, we want to be 10 times more scalable, we could take certain actions to get there. So we have to always remember that this is a constantly kind of changing or evolving, I think that's a better word to say, evolving kind of service. And we definitely want to be in that space. Like, we want to listen to feedback, evolve. That's the kind of place we want to go. So again, to answer your specific question, we haven't hit a limit, but not to say that that's the kind of place we want to be. We are an operational data store, so let's be kind of picky on what kind of data that you bring into common data service.
Yeah, because one of the things I picked up on is that it said that new applications is going to be built on the common data service. So it would be probably populated with a lot of different data entities that are now you have talent that is built on top of it. You also have the product graph, which is going to be based on this. So there's going to be a lot of different entities pulled into this.
Yep.
And probably newer applications that are going to be pulled into this as well. So how would you do the environmental management of this, like staging it, preparing it, doing it test environment, and then publishing it as a production environment?
Yep. So that's a good segue to, I want to take just 2 more minutes because I'm super hungry. I'm sure you guys are tired as well. But I'll tell you this, it kind of segues into when you, let me cover the license piece as well, because I don't want to hide behind something that we always get feedback on. In fact, I want to take it up front. So there are 2 licenses required. One is a P2 license that you require to create a CDS database, to model the data inside it. And at a minimum, you need 1 P2 license, and you need a P1 license for anybody trying to connect to applications running on CDS. The reason I talked about this now is one of the feedback that we constantly receive is, why aren't we automatically a part of the popular Office 365 E3 type of license and E5? We've heard, trust me, I was there at Inspire with my team, and we've heard a lot. So we are constantly figuring out how to integrate ourselves into those licenses, because trust me, we want to be used. So we will do everything to get there. So that's one. The second is, more importantly, the question that you asked about. Sorry, can you just jog my memory about the question?
How do you do a development test?
So yeah, right. So when you create an environment, you actually get to create like 2 databases. The theory is, you could use one for your test as a test kind of environment, test kind of database, and the other one as production. So that was the kind of the theory behind the 2 databases. So you could use one, and there's a constantly growing story around the ALM piece, wherein we will let you export applications and entities from one environment to another one. You can do some of that today. We need to kind of tighten up that story so that you can seamlessly move between environments. But what we have typically seen is customers use it accordingly to that, like have some test it out in the test environment or test the database, and the other one in the production.
Okay. So there's no, at the moment, I'll accept that it's in it's in the workings, right? Because again, it's an early product, but you have an idea of how to solve that ALM.
Absolutely.
Working
Absolutely.
from development to
yes,
production. Very well.
Also, I provided. Sorry, before we close, I just want to say a couple of things. I gave you some links for the DNB. I remember mentioning about it, Dun Bradstreet. And I want to be very clear about, they're in the business of, they're seen as a trusted source of crucial data for businesses.
Yeah.
So they store profiles, so to speak, wherein which businesses will flourish, which may do great, that kind of thing. And also they know which businesses are connected to which other businesses. And I think they provide some sort of algorithms along with some third-party vendors that they work with. That's the kind of information they're integrating with CDS. And I provide you 2 links, one on the Microsoft site and the other one on Forbes. So please definitely do read that. That's a huge win for us and for them. Also provided a couple of more links. One is the preview program. So CDS preview progs at Microsoft.com. If you want to join us, absolutely feel free. On a daily basis, we are getting a decent number of customers to join us. So absolutely feel free to drop us a mail at cdspreviewprogs at Microsoft.com and we'll get you in.
Is that
the last one
is that open for
Yeah.
partners who just want to play around and experience
Absolutely.
it? Yep.
Absolutely. And the advantage you get is you will have us, the engineering team, helping you out with the things that you're working through. We will do early demos on all new features, and you get access to those early pieces as part of the preview. We also have a pretty vibrant Yammer group wherein we truly see not just us helping customers and partners, it's customers helping customers too. So that kind of learning, talking to real some of your peers in the other industries, I think it really helps. So you're most welcome to join our preview programs. Also, a simple link to remember, aka.ms/common data service. That's where you go for all our documentation. In fact, Lance has recently updated his article on data integration. Matthew has put together something on record level security as well. So that's where we will always throw our documentation. So ak.ms/common data service. And last but not the least, I must say this, we've done several conferences, several meetings. There's something unique we've done. We didn't fancy doing a video kind of thingy, but I have to say huge thanks to Fredrik and Tommy for giving us the opportunity, for working with us. We were not available the last month or so because we were constantly on the road going to different conferences. So thank you for giving us the opportunity and being the cool guys that you are. It's been fun, absolutely fun.
Thanks,
Well,
Sabin.
thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule to talk to us and the community in general. We hope to get a lot of feedback on this, and maybe we'll post some questions and send them your way. So
Absolutely.
super. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
And I'm running for lunch. See
Go
you.
eat, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.